If you enjoy Ship Chat, consider supporting the channel further as a channel member. You'll get all sorts of exclusive perks, including a month-by-month update on the Dominion War as it happens 250 years in the future. Thank you very much. This is the New Orleans class frigate. It's a fan favourite, as many of you know, and is a very well-liked design. It's one of the Wolf 359 models. It was built by Ed Miriaki and then promptly boshed around quite a bit. Quite heavily scarred, unfortunately. You can see in some of these pictures, one of the nacelles is almost completely scorched away, and there's a lot of burn marks, particularly on the dorsal quarters of the hull. It's pretty prominent in the Wolf 359 graveyard sequence. It's one of the more visible ones. It's also quite interesting as a kit bash. One of those, it brings up one of those issues of a kit bash. There's only one kit that's actually used in it, and that's the Enterprise D kit. There are no other models that are actually used in it. There's a couple original parts that make the bridge and the pylons, and then of course there's the famous highlighter modules, which are a handy bit of stationery to be sure. Whenever you're undertaking a research mission, it pays to have those modules on your ship. But in any case, it brings up an interesting issue because it's purely built essentially out of scaled down Galaxy class parts and original parts. It's really hardly fair to call it a kit bash. It's only a kit bash in the same way that a Miranda or a Nebula is a kit bash. So I don't know if it really deserves that title so much. In any case, that's its real-life explanation. In universe, it's really quite unique. It's one of the first Brahms ships, and it's significantly smaller than any of the other of the Brahms line of ships. The Brahms line are the line of ships that will culminate in the Galaxy class, and they're all identifiable. They all have the same nacelles and often feature similar saucer sections. There's differences between them all, of course, but it's the smallest at 340 meters, making it substantially smaller than the other Brahms ships, which are all over. Well, the smallest is the Challenger at 390, but that's a pretty substantial ship. So it's quite unusually small, and the nacelles are actually much smaller. And the reason for that is that this was actually, as I say, it was the first of the Brahms ships. It was made in the 2340s, roughly, and was really kind of a proof of concept. Remember, up to this point, it's really been the Ambassador class, and actually the Brahms line of ships have a couple of untested concepts that they wanted to go through. The nacelles, for one, and so they built the nacelles on a micro scale to see that they actually worked, and then the plan would be to then, of course, extend them to a larger, because the nacelles are not, the warp coils are not actually fully circular, they're, lozenge shaped, which is really quite peculiar, and obviously gives you a odd-shaped warp field, but it was determined more efficient. The other thing that is, of course, often overlooked is that this is among one of the first elliptical saucer designs. You'll get other ones like the Cheyenne and the Springfield, but this was the first one that was, again, paired that elliptical saucer with those warp nacelles, and there was a very particular reason for it. Obviously, an elliptical saucer gives you more internal volume. It was concluded that it would be more efficient in the warp field because it wouldn't be stretched so much farther forward. Instead, you're actually just widening it sideways, but it was determined that as long as you have the nacelles reach out as far as the saucer, then it would actually be fine. And actually, it would grant you good field efficiency, because remember, the warp field has fundamentally changed in shape, especially when you compare it to, even if you compare it to the Ambassador, which sits quite high in a spherical warp field. It actually lowers the profile of the warp field, and that was found to actually give greater warp field maneuverability, since there's greater distance between, and so you have greater torque. You have greater steering, effectively, even at high warp speeds. So that was one of the concepts that was really being tested out on a micro scale. And really what they built here was a mini galaxy class, but very simplified, obviously. There's actually no saucer separation. If you look on the actual ship, you can't actually see the recess where you would normally have a separation between the saucer and secondary hull. It's all one integrated design. And that was also so that they could fit in a properly sized warp core. So it sees service in the 2340s and is extremely well liked. It will see a lot of use in the Cardassian border wars. In fact, it was the first ship to see action. It was of course the USS Rutledge at the Battle of Setlik III. And at the Battle of Setlik III, the New Orleans really proves itself, destroying 2 Cardassian ships and driving off a third very easily. The Cardassians just hadn't a chance, frankly. It really was quite an impressive performance, and it would go on to continue in numerous skirmishes and would prove extremely effective. It's also here that the upgrade of the torpedo modules was made. It was found that the Cardassians, if you shot at Cardassians with phasers, they might run away or they might try their luck. But it was found that if you fired a volley of torpedoes at them, that they would almost always scarper, particularly in those early days. Were not up to scratch at all. And so yeah, they'd pretty much scarper the moment they saw a photon torpedo. So Starfleet figured that a good deterrent to further Cardassian raids and aggression was just carry more torpedoes for warning shots, effectively. And that's really where those modules came from. As the Cardassian border wars became more intense, it would continue to see action as a mainline frigate. The Rutledge itself was present at the Battle of Minos Corva. It performed extremely well. It would actually continue to see action in and out of the war throughout most of the 2350s, up until the Battle of the Badlands, in which it was run down and destroyed by some Mark II Coulinors, although the crew managed to get away perfectly safe, and many of them would, and Benjamin Maxwell would of course go on to command a Nebula class, so it was quite a promotion in that way. It was going from a mini galaxy class to a mini galaxy class, or slightly less mini galaxy class, but still not the full thing. In any case, that brings us, of course, to when the rest of the Brahms line came in, and it was really originally planned to be scrapped, since the Nebula and all of the other ships would take over those duties, but it was found it had really carved out a good niche for itself as a patrol frigate and just general purpose ship. It was also much smaller and handier, and they had built actually a fair number of them, so it was determined it was definitely modern enough, especially compared to some of the other ships that were in use at the time, and so it would continue to see use. It would actually come into question again with the launch of the Intrepid class, the new mini galaxy class, but it was actually found that, apart from anything, the Intrepid was very expensive. By that point, there was increasing tensions throughout the Alpha Quadrant, ultimately culminating in the Dominion War, and it was decided that having a very capable but ultimately disposable frigate like the New Orleans would be very handy indeed. Unlike the Intrepid, which was extremely expensive, they could afford to put this one at risk and put it into the front lines, and it definitely had a good combat pedigree, and there was perhaps also an element of political or a psychological motivation of them keeping it. It was a great reminder of the Cardassian border wars. It was really the symbol of that conflict of Starfleet really making do even while being pacifist. So it was definitely a very strong symbol and a strong message to send, although it would take significant losses during the Dominion War. In the Dominion War, it serves as the mainline frigate, and so is basically serving as an intermediate between essentially the skirmishing patrol, picket half of a fleet that mostly does patrol and reconnaissance. It's also expected to go in and do some light fighting in a general engagement, bridging the gap between the larger and smaller ships. It ultimately is there forming the bulwark, the connective tissue of a fleet, being able to work with most things, though it's a real jack of all trades, though master of none. It would also be paired up with a lot of the other newer frigates, including in elite formations. There would be paired with Intrepids. The Intrepid would generally take on more of the reconnaissance duties and more of the combat duties, as well as with some of the heavier frigates like the Norway and Steamrunner. And it performed reasonably well in the Dominion War and was produced in large numbers, and that really saw it through into the 25th century, and it would see numerous updates, although it would be demoted in classification. Scale creep that was occurring, but that began to occur into the 25th century. It was no longer really adequate as a frigate, and so was demoted down to a recon destroyer. But it again is pretty capable as a destroyer, and again, with most Federation technology, there's a huge amount of modularity and customizability that is likely to increase its overall lifespan for quite a while to come. Certainly it's not going anywhere anytime soon, and has definitely shown itself to be a very handy jack of all trades. It was obviously a design that was ahead of its time, and obviously being a proof of concept, and well, it clearly proved that concept and was extremely successful in that regard. As I say, it makes for a very handy and well-liked design even today.